fashion to chlorine, only it's more efficient. And to relate it easily, ozone is created by two opposite electrical poles arcing. And if you imagine an electric welder, when your children see a welder welding, that sparking, the gas given off by that sparking is ozone. That gas, when he welds, dissipates to the atmosphere. We actually have a similar arcing effect, and we trap it and contain it. So therefore we can then use it by mixing it with water.
Because the animals that occupy these tanks like to splash around, a top-up system has been installed to ensure that the water always stays at the right level. Now, what are the smaller pools used for?
The small pools are designed that if we have an animal that's immobile, that needs required medical attention, the animal can be treated, it can be dealt with in a more easily fashion. Just imagine if we had a small sea lion in the large pool behind you, you had to drop the pool to treat the animal. Remember, usually the animals that come here are wild animals, so they're probably a little bit under stress, A, from their injury, and plus they're not used to humans. So we put them in the smaller areas and we can manage them more easily.
Wendy Blanchard is a marine park vet who has helped save the lives of many sick and injured animals over the years. Wendy, how many animals have you rehabilitated so far?
Well, Angela, since the centre opened, only two. We suppose the first two of many over the years, but we've had two rough-toothed dolphins in who stranded together, and they came in, spent about 8 weeks here, and then were released.
Now, having a facility like this, does it make your job any easier?
Much, much easier. In previous strandings, we've had to take the risk of housing animals from outside in water that is in common circulation with our own stock, which puts our stock at risk. And also out in the pools, because SeaWorld is open during the day, although we've got lights and the capacity to light up areas at night, it's very hard to work in the dark. And if you're doing a 24-hour watch on an animal, it's so much easier to do it in an area that's designed for that sort of thing.
The vets at this marine park hope that they don't see too many sick or injured animals in their pools. But when the time comes for stranded or injured marine creatures to spend some time in hospital, at least there is a better chance of them making a full recovery and returning to the wild.
Oh, not bad. So, while I'm on a big horse, after a big show, I've got some rather big art to show you. Now, this particular piece was sent to us by Misty Walder, who comes from Smithtown in New South Wales. Misty, I love the naive style of this particular piece. The watercolour is very effective and, of course, it features a big crocodile with some very brave fish swimming beneath it. Misty, what more can we say other than we love your work? Keep your eye out for the postman. We're sending you a Totally Wild pack.
This week in the Totally Wild Prize Pack, there's a great video called The Rhythms of Life. Some colourful plasticine and a Mr. Face to have lots of fun with. Yummy after-school snacks and an Australian animal mug. All of this will come to you in an environmentally friendly bag from Handy Bags Australia.
Well, that's all we've got time for on today's show, so wherever you are, I hope you're having a big afternoon. And from Middlecott, Victoria, myself and all the other Totally Wild crew, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time, Totally Wild's on the telly.
He's crazy. They're smart. So who's entertaining who? Dolphins with Robin Williams, 7:30 Monday.
Nobody in this country has a right to threaten their fellow Australians with economic damage and economic destruction.
This is an attempt to inflict a mortal injury on this union by getting us stupidly to enact some industrial action nationally so they can take us to the federal court, get us deregistered and put us out of business.
The first shots fired in the long-awaited war for the waterfronts. The showdown on the Australian docks. That's our top story this Sunday. Good morning and welcome to another edition of Newsweek. I'm Stephanie Kennedy. Also on the program, despite a sizzling sex scandal, President Clinton's popularity soars. And the deepening mystery of two missing American divers left behind on the Great Barrier Reef. And in our second half hour, ALP President Barry Jones is our guest on Meet the Press. But first this morning, here are the snapshots from this Newsweek. Chinese New Year and a time for reflection and celebration. The night sky came alive as traditional performers blasted away evil spirits and ushered in the Year of the Tiger, symbolising strength and bravery. Don't step on them, bet on them, the catch cry of the annual Cockroach Cup. But punting turned to panic when roaches scuttled into a crowd that moved faster than the race favourites. And to a race of a very different kind, spectacular Australia Day scenes of tall ships from around the world. They set sail from Sydney to Hobart in the week-long Yacht Classic. Overseas, and thousands were left homeless as raging floods ripped through houses, roads and bridges. The El Niño weather phenomenon was blamed for the unseasonable torrential downpours. Also blamed on El Niño, an environmental disaster threatening an endangered species. Scientists suspect the deaths of hundreds of sea lion pups could be linked to rising water temperatures. And radical climate changes to our south are causing the melting and collapse of a massive ice shelf. Temperatures here are rising 5 times faster than the global average. A tearful ending to a Super Bowl party that swung out of control. Riot police moved in as rowdy fans overturned cars and looted shops. 20 people were arrested and 40 others were injured in the after-game ruckus. Russian cats were clowning around this week. The talented cast of feline acrobats delighted the audience, performing death-defying feats in Moscow's Cat Theatre. And now to the week in politics. And the National Farmers Federation moved into the stevedoring business this week. As shock troops moved onto the docks, the NFF plans to use non-union labour on the Australian waterfront, all with the blessing of the federal government. War on the wharves was finally a reality. Angry unionists confronted uniformed security guards, hired by the National Farmers Federation to secure number 5 web dock for their new stevedoring business.
We made this country for you.
Underwriting the union-busting business, the NFF war chest, rumoured to be as much as $10 million.
We'll be looking for some good, solid country lads to go into business.
A business endorsed by the federal government.
I said, that's fair enough, it's a free country if that's what you want to do, and the government will support any reasonable efforts to improve the efficiency on the waterfront provided it's lawful.
After the abortive attempt to train mercenaries in Dubai, the union was on red alert.
It's a sham. It's an attempt to cause, I should say, great industrial unrest on the Australian waterfront.
Nobody in this country has a right to threaten their fellow Australians with economic damage and economic destruction.
Earlier the same day, the PM had delivered the first of his Federation speeches. As the first pork barrel of the undeclared election campaign was rolled out, the PM also promised continuing microeconomic reform, and the faithful didn't have long to wait. Planning to be up and running in 3 months, the NFF moved in more security heavyweights in the dead of night. Retaliating, the union brought in its own big guns, the action spilling over to Trades Hall.
This is not an issue about productivity on the waterfront, it's about union busting.
Further claims of government involvement after security guards used prison-issue riot shields and batons. Caught in the crossfire, car manufacturer Toyota. $16 million worth of cars parked indefinitely. The government ready to pounce on any breaches of the law.
We will not, in any sense, shy away from seeing the law fully observed.
And to discuss the war on the waterfront, Network 10's political editor Paul Bongiorno joins me in the studio. Well, Paul, does the NFF have, firstly, the resolve and the resources to see this thing through?
Well, they say they do, and I guess an indication is they've already paid up front the $5 million to lease the Webb dock. We know that the NFF has a fighting fund. We suspect that perhaps other stevedoring companies are in there making big contributions, but they're not going to tell us exactly who's giving us the money. We do know that the NFF has a history of union busting going back to the early 80s over Munginbury in the Northern Territory.
Well, we saw attempts last year in Cairns and the Dubai mercenaries. Do you think this will now break the power of the Maritime Union?
Well, that's what it's aimed at. There is no doubt that there's a good deal of ideologically driven union busting going on here. One of the problems, I think, for the MUA, the big maritime union, is that it doesn't deliver on productivity, that it does have a closed shop, and that it is feather-bedded. So from that point of view, I think the unions are on a hiding-to-nothing in the PR war.
Well, it looks like they're losing the PR war, though, doesn't it, with those pictures during the week of confrontation on the docks. Do you think they have any chance of winning the public over?
Well, they may, and I think it depends how it plays out in the weeks and the months ahead. I mean, the curious thing about all of this, there are elements of business, for example, the car exporters and even the grains exporters who were caught unawares by all of this and who have got a lot to lose. One figure I saw, an economist said that even if they get the productivity thereafter, halve the number of workers, they'll gain about $160 million, whereas we have a $200 billion export trade. So I think that puts the whole battle into some sort of perspective.
Well, the federal government said that it only found out about this exercise a few weeks ago. What role do you think the government has played in all this?
Well, fundamentally, with the help of the Cheryl Kernot-led Democrats, it's put into place the legal framework that will enable the NFF to take on the unions through the courts. But look, it's no secret the federal government is a cheerleader in all of this. Talks to trying to prove a conspiracy between the state Liberal government of Victoria and the federal Liberal government, I think are laughable. Everybody knows that they want this to happen and have laid the groundwork for it to happen.
Well, the next 2 weeks, the political agenda will be dominated by the Constitutional Convention, which starts tomorrow. Do you think any consensus will come out of it?
Well, I didn't a few months ago, but the Prime Minister has taken a lead here. He's given a task to this convention to come up with an alternative Republican model, and on paper, at least, the Republicans are in the majority, so there's got to be a chance of something positive coming out of it.
And no doubt you'll be talking about that with Barry Jones on Meet the Press. Thanks, Paul, for coming in, and of course, Paul will be back a little later with Meet the Press. Ahead on Newsweek, the outback town underwater, Katherine hit by raging floodwaters. And as the sex scandal rocks the White House, Hillary stands by her man.
It's time to go back to school.
Woohoo! The greatest day of the year.
But not for long.
I got expelled.
That's my boy.
Now Marge is taking control.
I didn't do it.
And everyone's taking notice.
You people make me sick.
The Simpsons, 7:30 tonight.
Homeowners. The Bank of Melbourne's weekend home loan sale is on at selected branches this Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Refinance your home loan and reduce your monthly payments. Save with a low variable rate of 6.19% per annum. Your loan approved on the spot and no upfront fees. Call 131 575 131 575 or ask at your branch. The Bank of Melbourne cuts the cost of banking.
The Plant Barn is having the great Australia Day plant sale, and Farmer Ted is slashing all prices from now till 8 p.m. Monday. Standard roses an incredible $14.99. Hanging baskets only $5.99. Flowering bougainvillea down to $3.99. Flowering fuchsia a crazy $3.99. And James Sterling Pittosporum an amazing 5 for $10. There's thousands of plants all to clear at ridiculous prices from now until 8 p.m. Monday at the Plant Barn, Old Geelong Road, Hoppers Crossing, and Plenty Road, Munda. So come on down to the Plant Barn.
Well, you know what it's like. The more you put into life, the more you get out of it. That's why so much has gone into the new Holden Astra. So you'll have everything you need to look good, feel confident, and in control of your life. So you can enjoy every single moment. There's more to life in a Holden Astra.
If you live in the sticks, remember they burn. But there's a great deal you can do now to protect your home and family from bushfire. Clean up, plan, and prepare. But for goodness sake, do it now. And don't get caught out in the heat of the moment. Call CFA on 1-800-240-667 for a free guide to help you plan and prepare.
The V8s are back on the track for 98. See last year's series winner Glenn Seaton up against the Kings of the Mountain, Perkins and Incl. Round 1 from Sandown, the Shell Australian Touring Car Championship, today on 10.
Welcome back to Newsweek. It's been described as the top end's worst natural disaster since Cyclone Tracy. A 1 in 500-year flood deluged the town of Katherine, forcing thousands to evacuate and leaving tens of millions of dollars damage in its wake. A spectacular display of nature's might, the river that gave the town of Katherine its name rising to a staggering 20 metres. Torrential rain from Cyclone Les forced mass evacuations of locals, many leaving with only what they could carry.
Come on, mate. Mum's here.
Declared a state of emergency, the federal government pledged a multi-million-dollar disaster package, the Prime Minister flying in to witness the scale of the destruction.
I've come here to find out, to see for myself the dimension of the problem.
With floodwaters receding, the enormity of the damage was revealed. Many houses and businesses in need of a total rebuild.
We've lost 2 businesses, 2 homes, and everyone else is in the same boat.
As Katherine starts counting the cost, remote communities in the northwest are now bracing for the worst. An unthinkable end to the diving holiday of a lifetime for 2 American tourists, left behind while scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef, and incredibly, nobody noticed. Experienced divers, husband and wife Eileen and Thomas Lonergan, were diving with a tour group on St Crispin Reef, 70 kilometres from Port Douglas. Inexplicably, tour operators Outer Edge Dive didn't notify police of the missing couple until some 48 hours after returning to port. Though a full-scale search failed to find the pair, the mother of the missing woman remains hopeful.
We're praying, first of all, for our daughter and our son-in-law that they will be brought home safely and they'll be perfectly okay. And we're praying for the people who own the dive company because we know that they must be in a terrible shape right now.
A diary found among the couple's belongings indicated some personal trauma, but so far suicide has been ruled out. Australian of the Year, Golden Girl Kathy Freeman, and Young Australian of the Year, Vietnamese refugee Tan Le, won the hearts of the nation with their grace and goodwill. But not the heart of One Nation leader Pauline Hanson, the self-declared red-blooded Aussie declaring the awards a political conspiracy.
I question, is it to do with the WIC debate, and has it got to do with the stolen children generation, and also with the Asian girl? Is it because of my speaking out about the number of Asians that have been coming to Australia who are not assimilating?
The PM dismissed the attack as an ugly outburst. A sad week in Victorian politics as Basil and Flicker called it a day. Premier Jeff Kennett and wife Felicity issued an official statement confirming their marriage of 25 years is over. Citing opposition attacks and media scrutiny for the split, Mr Kennett said he had paid the ultimate price.
The real tragedy of this is now my partner for life has found it too difficult, and I accept full responsibility for that.
A 37-year-old man was murdered in a cowardly attack within metres of his inner-city home. Returning from the local pub, unemployed father of one, Robbie McPherson, was set upon by a gang of 8 men after a minor traffic incident.
The man received savage blows to the body, to the head, to the back, and the final wound was a knife wound to the chest.
Police say the killers are known to frequent the area. A bloody shooting in a real estate office left 1 woman dead and 2 injured after a crazed gunman opened fire. Fleeing from the scene, the gunman crashed his car before shooting himself twice in the neck.
I went down to the car and there was a man lying in the front seat with a lot of blood coming out of his body.
The dead woman is believed to be the gunman's de facto partner. A bummer for Byron Bay's nudists. Facing a ban on bearing all, 1,000 naturists staged a pants-off demo under the banner, Nude Ain't Rude.
People here are just doing what comes natural and enjoying a good family day out here. And like in Europe and many places around the world.
Unlike Europe, say protesters, Byron's not keeping abreast of the times. Local sun lovers copping dressing downs and council fines of up to $600. But at least for the day, council officers opted for a hands-off approach. And now to news overseas. They call him the comeback kid, and this week the US president lived up to his name. Despite the sex and lies scandal engulfing his leadership, Bill Clinton's popularity ratings skyrocketed.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
US President Clinton's State of the Union address, but the nation was more interested in the state of his presidency. Denying accusations that he had a sexual affair with former White House intern Monica Lewinsky and then urging her to lie under oath, an angry president once again faced the media.
I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people.
Mrs. Clinton stood by her man, saying the scandal's a right-wing conspiracy led by independent counsel Kenneth Starr.
A lot of this is deliberately designed to sensationalize charges against my husband because everything else they've tried has failed.
Despite the damaging allegations, Bill Clinton enjoyed a popularity boost, 67% saying he should remain in office. And Monica Lewinsky's fate also remains unclear, with her lawyers signalling an immunity deal has gone sour.
She might not be granted immunity because they can't corroborate what she has to say, or because Starr does not believe that she's telling the truth.
To the Middle East, and a military showdown imminent as the US warned it would act alone in attacking Iraq over weapons of mass destruction.
Over the next few days, I will be explaining the American position to leaders in the countries I visit, while making it clear that in confronting the clear and present danger posed by Iraqi lawlessness, the diplomatic string is running out.
Although Britain backed a military mission, France and Russia urged a diplomatic solution. As Baghdad accused America of fabricating the arms inspection crisis, hundreds of Iraqis signed up for armed service, vowing to fight a US military strike. Meanwhile, UN Chief Weapons Inspector, Australian Richard Butler, was under fire for claiming Iraq had enough biological weapons to blow away Tel Aviv.
And we think that this man should be reprimanded for his misbehavior.
An ill-fitting suit for an Aussie astronaut. Andy Thomas infuriated Russian officials after complaining his spacesuit was too tight and not holding pressure. But after some strap adjustments, Thomas was back in orbit.
The suit problem was real. I mean, I couldn't get it on. I tried with Anatoly, the commander here, several times to get it on, and it was just impossible until we made the adjustments, and then it went on fine.
All dressed up and ready for his 4-month stint, the latest MIA member took some tips from astronaut Dave Wolf, the American he replaced.
There's a lot of hints on how to live and how to be efficient and how to keep track of your items and, in fact, how to keep out of each other's way.
US endeavour will bring Wolf back to a pizza, a beer and his girlfriend on Earth. The British government ordered a new inquiry into the Bloody Sunday massacre in Northern Ireland 26 years ago.
Our concern now is simply to establish the truth and to close this painful chapter once and for all.
14 people were killed when British paratroopers opened fire on a Catholic protest march. An earlier inquiry cleared the soldiers, but critics labelled it a whitewash. A right royal recovery for Britain's Queen Mum. She's back on her feet after hip replacement surgery this week. As she rested in hospital, a string of loyal royals found her in good spirits.
Extremely high. Annoyed, I think, more than anything else that this has happened, and is on a fast track to recovery. She's just absolutely unstoppable.
The 97-year-old broke her left hip after falling at the royal estate at Sandringham, and the flowers and cards flooded in.
It's kind of like a piece of old china, you know, you wouldn't like to lose.
The Queen Mother should be out of hospital in less than 2 weeks. Nick Whitehead reporting for Newsweek.
And coming up, the most expensive movie ever made becomes one of the highest grossing of all time, and its voyage is far from over. And a wave on the wild side. Surfers let it all hang out at Sydney's Bondi Beach.
8:30 tonight.
Who is this? Your worst nightmare.
A ruthless terrorist.
We'll show the world that I'm not bluffing.
A deadly cargo.
Hijackers may have an atomic bomb.
A train ride that will blow you away.
Did you know that your bomb can be detonated by remote?
Patrick Stewart, Christopher Lee, and 007's Pierce Brosnan.
We've got a situation here that could make Chernobyl look like a popgun.
The explosive, all-action heartstopper.
You stay on that train. You're a dead man.
Alistair McLean's Death Train. 8:30 tonight on 10.
To the cat. I'll give you a snack.
There's ordinary snacks. Or there's new schmackos, lip-schmacking snacks packed with real beef.
Please, Oscar, be nice to the cat. I'll give you a schmacko.
I love you, yes I do. I love you, yes it's true. Echo, echo, without schmackos and you.
These past few days, I've felt something between us. Look, what I'm really trying to say is I think I love you.
You've been watching too many films, Nigel.
Yeah.
For a limited time, Westpac is offering a 2-year fixed-rate home loan at 6.25% per annum. You'll find it hard to get a better 2-year fixed rate. Call 131900 or visit your local branch.
To entertainment, and unless you've been living under a rock, it would be hard to have missed Titanic the movie. In Australia, it's grossed more than $26 million, challenging Babe and Crocodile Dundee as our biggest box office winner ever. But around the world, its performance is even better.
The pundits said Titanic would sink, that there was no way a movie so over budget could ever be a hit. Well, never have they been so wrong. This week, after less than a month on the screens, the $296 million epic has made it into the top grossing movies of all time, on the list at number 10. And its run is far from over. Not bad for a movie where you already know the ending. Titanic is up there with some biggies on the list. At number 1, there's Star Wars, then E.T., Jurassic Park, Forrest Gump, The Lion King, Independence Day, Return of the Jedi, The Empire Strikes Back and Home Alone. However, Hollywood's daily variety newspaper has tried to even the score by adjusting figures for inflation, and that puts Gone with the Wind at the top of the list, along with The Sound of Music and The Ten Commandments.
Congratulations.
A British soccer player now has some spice to put on his rack after becoming engaged to Victoria Adams, better known as Posh Spice from the girl power group Spice Girls. The 23-year-old singer is sporting a large diamond courtesy of the Manchester United star David Beckham. The pair will wed next year. And Mariah Carey has arrived for her first visit in Australia, kicking off her national tour in Brisbane.
And I love her! I flew from Papua New Guinea just to see her! And we all love her, right? Yeah!
The petite songstress plays Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth over the next 10 days. Angela Bishop reporting for Newsweek.
Sport now, and a week where Australia's one-day cricket team answered its many critics in the best way possible. After losing all of their preliminary games against South Africa, the Australians rallied for a surprise victory in the final series.
For Australia's one-day team, it was very much a case of saving the best for last. The controversial policy of separating our test and one-day sides vindicated, for the moment at least.
For captain Steve Waugh and his young team, time to hit back at the knockers. The South Africans once again full of fight and cheek in the deciding final, but for Australia, a win to savour.
Really wanted to win that one for ourselves because we've been under a bit of pressure.
So it was a special moment.
A moment of triumph clouded by grief. Test wicketkeeper Ian Healy became the first gloveman in history to reach 100 tests, just days after the death of his father.
If we can show half the amount of fight that you've had to in the last couple of months, the Australian team will be hard to beat this match. I love you very much.
Some dubious cricket history for the West Indies and England. Sabina Park's poisonous pitch making target practice of the English batsmen. After a string of hits, the track was deemed too dangerous. The Test match abandoned after just 56 minutes of play.
I'm horrified and, I'm crying tears of blood.
Swiss teenager Martina Hingis won her second straight Australian Open title, a straight sets result over Spain's Conchita Martinez.
She's done it again.
While Czech Peter Korda headed towards this afternoon's men's decider against Marcelo Rios, the tennis version of a bouncing Czech. Super Bowl and a dog day in Diego for Green Bay. The favourites sent packing by the Denver Broncos in a thriller. The match decided in the final 2 minutes. To the beach, where they gave the boardies the bums rush. Surfing's new wave. On Australia Day, wetsuits abandoned for birthday suits. Leanne West reporting for Newsweek.
I guess that's one way to go surfing. And now to the latest sports results. In tennis, the Woodies missed out on another Grand Slam crown, losing the men's double final at the Australian Open. To hockey, and the English women's team has broken its 11-year losing streak against Australia with a 4-2 win in Perth. And in the Ericsson Cup soccer, Sydney United defeated Brisbane 3-0 and Marconi beat Gippsland. And we'll have more of Newsweek in just a moment.
The Plant Barn is having the great Australia Day plant sale, and Farmer Ted is slashing all prices from now till 8 p.m. Monday. Standard roses an incredible $14.99. Hanging baskets only $5.99. Flowering bougainvillea down to $3.99. Flowering fuchsia a crazy $3.99. And James Sterling Pittosporum an amazing $5 for $10. There's thousands of plants all to clear at ridiculous prices from now until 8 p.m. Monday at the Plant Barn, Old Geelong Road, Hoppers Crossing, and Plenty Road, Munda. So come on down to the Plant Barn.
Hi, I'm from Safety Electrical Services. I know most of you are aware of the Clipsal safety switch, and I'm sure you've all seen some of our ads depicting tragedies regarding electrical accidents. But did you also know that our company has been recognised by the government for operating a very professional safety switch business? We're proud of our company, and nothing gives us more pleasure in seeing you take the care and concern for your family by having our qualified technicians install your Clipsal safety switch to your home. As an incentive to get straight to the phone right now, we have a fantastic deal that is only going to last for the next 15 minutes. Forget the price of around $250 which you could pay for the heavy-duty Clipsal safety switch. If you call us within the next 15 minutes, we will fully install one of these devices for only, now listen to this, $179. Plus, we'll give you a $30 bonus handyman gift after each installation. At $179, you'll have to be quick. The number to call is 131240. 131240.
Style is a very personal thing. It's not just about looks. It's about presence and quality. Good style has to stem from good quality. You express yourself with style. But what looks good on you won't necessarily work for everyone. That's why Holden is all sorts of cars for all sorts of people.
Welcome back to Newsweek, and now to the Media Monitor's leading issues index. The Clinton sex scandal dominated the news this week, with the Wharves battle Asia's financial crisis, Pauline Hanson's comments on Australian of the Year, and John Howe's new work for the Dole scheme also in the top 5. And in finance, on Wall Street, the Dow Jones closed down to 7,906. Gold remained steady on 302.50 US, and the Aussie dollar rose to 68.35 US cents. And now to the news headlines. Waterfront workers are claiming a victory in their battle with the National Farmers Federation after a man hired to train non-union waterfront workers defected to the union. The Federal Labor Party is promising a standalone referendum on the Republic before the Sydney Olympics if it wins the next election. And overseas, in the crisis in the Gulf, the United States has repeated its threat of a military strike against Iraq after talks in London. That's all from Newsweek this Sunday. Please join me again next week at 8 o'clock for all the week's news. Next on the 10 Network, ALP President Barry Jones meets the press with Paul Bongiorno.
Good morning and welcome to Meet the Press on what is the eve of an historic convention in Canberra, a convention which could lead to an Australian, one of us, being head of state. The irony is the convention was put in place by a Prime Minister who used to see the Republic as a distraction, and it comes at a time when one of John Howard's obsessions, breaking union monopolies, is otherwise at centre stage. Also not far from view, tax reform and WIC native land title, all issues that sharply divide the major parties in what is the run-up to an election. Today, the Deputy Chairman of the Constitutional Convention and the newly re-elected President of the Australian Labor Party, Barry Jones, meets the press. The panel, Karen Middleton, the West Australian, and Peter Charlton, the Courier Mail. Thanks for joining us, Mr Jones.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, with the convention roughly made up of a third monarchists and two-thirds Republicans who don't seem to be able to agree on a model for a republic, is there much hope of achieving any consensus by the end of the fortnight?
Well, you broke it up in a particular way, but it also needs to be said that there's a reasonable proportion of undecided. So you'd have to say that of those who've made their minds up and who've declared themselves, then yes, those proportions are about right. But probably about a quarter still haven't really declared where they are. Well, I mean, the experience of the next 10 days of meeting will determine whether it's possible to reach a consensus, and no doubt there'll be as much negotiation, discussion going on outside public view as there is on the floor of the old Parliament House.
I see reports that you and the chairman, Ian Sinclair, in fact have organised or tried to organise the convention to maximise the chance of consensus. Can you tell us something about the machinery of the convention?
Well, essentially we found ourselves appointed, of course, by the government, and it was very important for us to establish that we weren't simply acting as agents of the government. Government, of course, has its own agenda, but the people who've been elected to the convention have got their agendas too. That was what secured their votes. So the result is that what we've been trying to do is pursue a sort of middle ground between the line that the government's taking and the line that the elected conference delegates and some of the appointed conference delegates want to take. See, part of our problem has been that if we have the very narrow agenda, well, we might be able to get through that expeditiously in the 10 sitting days, but there may be a number of people who are elected who say, well, I was elected on a slightly different agenda and I regret the fact that I haven't had a chance to put it up. On the other hand, if you lean too far in the other direction and say, well, let's have 10 days of glorious oratory where you can all bring up whatever it is that you want to talk about, there's a grave danger that we might finish the fortnight having had a marvellous time talking things through, but in fact we haven't come up with appropriate answers to the major questions that really led to the convention being called.
What does that mean, Mr Jones, for those people who want to talk about a Bill of Rights? I mean, the Women's Convention last week said that that was important and we should be talking about that.
Well, there are a couple of ways in which that could perhaps be handled. We've added a new item to the agenda, which is other issues. That is to say, some of the issues that don't come directly out of the question of whether we have an Australian as head of state. We've also created the situation of working parties, and I could conceive of a situation where if there's a particular group of people who want to set up a working party, particularly if it reflected a diversity of viewpoints, and they said, we want to go away somewhere and we're prepared to devote a few days to sitting down and talking about what we think might be some of the issues that are relevant to a Bill of Rights.
So they could talk about a Bill of Rights?
Well, yes, but it's probably less likely that we'll have much time in the full plenum you know, meeting in the old House of Representatives chamber. But if there are working parties who say, we think these are issues that need to be considered, then, you know, no doubt they can come back and their views can be noted. But as I say, my concern is that by putting 57 things on the agenda, you may finish up by not achieving agreement on many of them.
Has the Prime Minister been helpful by saying the real job of this convention is to come up with a Republican model?
Oh, he's absolutely right. I mean, that's the whole rationale behind setting it up. That's primary. The other issues are all very important, but in a sense they are secondary to that primary goal. Well, the question is as to whether, if somebody says, I was elected on the issue of we'll say, Aboriginal reconciliation, and I want to say something about it.
Yeah.
The question is whether we act in a very repressive way and say, well, look, you may have been elected on that program, but we don't propose to hear you. Our view would be that there'll be enough time, we think, if people stick to the 10-minute limit for speeches without commercial breaks in between, then, you know, they ought to have a chance to raise things that are of particular concern to them. But then, most of the time, they've got to concentrate on the specific issue.
If we get to the end of the 2 weeks without a consensus emerging on a kind of model, aren't we then entitled to say that the whole thing's failed and it's off the agenda for a very long time?
Well, it depends. I mean, one suggestion that's been put up, I think, in fact, Nick Minchin suggested that at the end of it, there could be a recommendation for an indicative plebiscite. That's not a constitutional referendum, but an indicative plebiscite where the convention said, well, look, there are 2 or 3 alternative models, as well as the retaining the status quo, and then you might get a view from the voters as to which of these models was the most attractive to them. And that then gives them the opportunity to say, well, the issue, the question that's most likely to get up in a constitutional referendum, bearing in mind you've got to have a majority of the voters plus a majority of the states, that could then be determined by that indicative referendum.
Well, Mr. Jones,
indicative plebiscite.
Mr. Jones, we do need to take a commercial break. We'll be back with you shortly on Meet the Press.
Comedy's Wild Man.
Do you feel older around them?
I feel very old around you. The Hollywood Hunks.
He's so hot!
Robin Williams and the co-stars of Good Will Hunting answer Oprah's cheeky questions.
I'm not gonna lie.
In an all-new Oprah special. Then at 8:30.
Kind of nice little designer thing, goes with any outfit, black.
From the director of Cool Runnings.
Feel like a gynecologist for a grizzly bear.
Robin Williams stars with Walter Matthau.
One of you fire a warning shot.
In the madcap comedy The Survivors, after Oprah, Wednesday on 10.
Your eyes in the morning sun. I feel you touch me in the pouring rain. And the moment that you wander far from me, I want to feel you in my arms again. And you come to me on a summer breeze, keep me warm in your love, then you softly leave.
The freshest, cleanest water is the most precious commodity we have. So let's save it while we can. Yarra Valley Water, a fresh approach.
If you're thinking sports car, you're thinking Honda Prelude. Honda Prelude. Thoughts made real.
The Plant Barn is having the Great Australia Day plant sale, and Farmer Ted is slashing all prices from now till 8 p.m. Monday. Standard roses an incredible $14.99. Hanging baskets only $5.99. Flowering bougainvillea down to $3.99. Flowering fuchsia a crazy $3.99. And James Sterling Pittosporum an amazing $5 for $10. There's thousands of plants all to clear at ridiculous prices from now until 8 p.m. Monday at the Plant Barn, Old Geelong Road, Hoppers Crossing, and Plenty Road, Munda. So come on down to the Plant Barn.
You're here, your bank's here, and you want to pay a bill here. You call your bank, tell them who to pay and from which of your accounts, and the bill's paid. Day or night. Easy as can be. New BPay.
The company that has worked so hard to bring you the freshest, cleanest water is now working even harder to help you use less with simple ideas that save water. Yarra Valley Water, a fresh approach.
We're speaking with the Deputy Chairman of the Constitutional Convention, Barry Jones, and we have a question from Karen Middleton.
Mr Jones, it's reported today that the Labor Party would like to have an early vote on the Republic. How feasible is it, do you think, that we could be actually a Republic by the time of the Sydney Olympics in 2000?
I think it might be stretching it a bit to do it by the time of the Sydney Olympics, although I can see the nature of the argument. I mean, first of all, when we come down with our report after the convention's over, the government's really got to determine what it's going to do with it. I know the Prime Minister said that the next 2000...
Isn't that one of the big weaknesses, that your report won't even be binding on the government?
Well, there's no way it could be binding on the government. I mean, you've got a convention that's a hybrid, half elected, half appointed. There's no constitutional power for us to bind a government. All we can be is to take an advisory role.
There's an argument, I suppose, that if we wanted to be a republic by 2000, we could go down the minimalist route and just have minimal change. Is it worth doing that, do you think, to get there quickly?
Look, as the Deputy Chairman of the Convention, I don't want to be really in an advocacy position. Of course, I have my own very strongly held views, but my main task in the next fortnight is to be fair and open in my role as Deputy Chairman. So I'm not expressing a preference for any model, because the worst thing that could happen would be if somebody gets up and says, if I approach the chair or the Deputy Chair, I won't get a fair go.
Well, what are your strongly held personal views on whether we should directly elect a president?
No, I'm not going to be drawn on that, because what happened at the National Conference last week was that a resolution went through which gave the Labor Party delegates, of which I'm not one, of course, which the Labor Party delegates maximum flexibility to engage in negotiation about what they thought was the best outcome, and that included, of course, direct election, indirect election, and the McGarvey model. So all of those are, in a sense, on the board. But I really, ever since I was appointed Deputy Chairman, I've taken a quite uncharacteristic vow of silence not to take an advocacy role about any position relating to the outcome of the convention.
Isn't this one of the major problems of the debate, that although a majority of Australians want a republic, an overwhelming majority want a directly elected president, but that then poses all sorts of problems of codification of powers and separation of powers and a different political system? How do we resolve that question in 2 weeks?
Well, I think, first of all, it may just be the first start of a process that includes a much higher level of public understanding of the Constitution. I think a lot of voters, and perhaps even some members of Parliament, maybe even some convention delegates, have only got a very shaky grasp of what the Constitution says and what the Constitution does.
Yeah.
Do you think people are acting in ignorance a little bit when they think they want a directly elected president then?
Well, I mean, I think there's a big gap between what the actual document, the actual Constitution says, and the way in which we operate it. In America, you know, they follow the Constitution very carefully. In Australia, we don't. See, there's no doubt that in the present Constitution, the most important figure in the Constitution is the Governor-General. There's no such reference, no such person as a Prime Minister or a Cabinet. They're not referred to in the document. Now, the result is that I think most people are familiar with the idea of a presidency along American lines, and they say, well, if we're going to become a republic, and then in brackets, like the United States, of course we ought to be directly involved. I think there's a massive job of public information that has to go on, and you can play an important role in that.
Barry Jones, the Prime Minister said that he would like to see this issue out of the way by the centenary of Federation, one way or the other. But isn't it a fact that if we haven't got a republic by 2001, there's no way a politician's fiat will put it off the agenda?
Yeah, it may well be that moving on towards the second centenary of Federation, and of course the new millennium in 2001, that may really concentrate people's minds wonderfully. And my hope is that at this convention that there may prove to be a good deal of goodwill in which people do want to have an outcome that can be regarded as the best for the nation and for national unity.
Well, you really absolutely have to come up with some kind of reasonable outcome, don't you? Otherwise, this very expensive convention will have done absolutely nothing.
This is the intention of the Chair and the Deputy Chair, to come up with a reasonable outcome. And most of all, that people that, of whatever point of view, go away from the convention saying we feel we were treated fairly.
Is that possible, given that the monarchists say that they have no mandate for anything but the status quo, yet all we've talked about this morning is change? How can they feel that they've been treated fairly if at the end of the convention people are talking about change, the monarchists want the status quo?
No, I mean in the actual procedure themselves, that it would be, the worst thing that could happen would be if say, the monarchists or some of the other people elected on smaller tickets went away and said we weren't given a fair opportunity to express our views. It's very important to Ian Sinclair and me that they are given a full opportunity to express their views.
Mr. Jones, time for another break on Meet the Press. We'll be back shortly.
Patrick Stewart, Christopher Lee, and 007's Pierce Brosnan.
We've got a situation here that could make Chernobyl look like a top gun.
The explosive, all-action heartstopper.
Who's down that train? You're a dead man.
Alistair MacLean's Death Train, 8:30 tonight on 10.
Homeowners, the Bank of Melbourne's weekend home loan sale is on at selected branches this Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Refinance your home loan and reduce your monthly payments. Save with a low variable rate of 6.19% per annum. Your loan approved on the spot and no upfront fees. Call 131 575 131 575 or ask at your branch. The Bank of Melbourne cuts the cost of banking.
It's usually sort of one call out after the other. It's not just tough physically, it's certainly tough in your relationships. Well, sometimes I get a headache. I just take a couple of Panadol, and they're good even on an empty stomach. I'd hardly take something I didn't trust.
Panadol, Australia's most trusted pain reliever. Use only as directed, and if pain persists, see your doctor.
You know, life's too precious to take chances.
This summer, Lays Thins is giving you the chance to win this summer extreme pack. Plus, just by entering, you can get a T-shirt or cap. Collect 8 tokens from selected packs and get your entry. Because anyone in Australia could win.
The biggest thing to happen to home improvement is Bunnings Warehouse. How big? Big enough to stock Australia's biggest range with well over 45,000 different products, all at Melbourne's lowest prices every day of the year. The selection just goes on and on, which means you'll always find what you're looking for. With 11 Bunnings warehouses all over Melbourne, there's one near you. Bunnings Warehouse. Lowest prices are just the beginning.
Last year, it ended with a bang.
Andy, get out of here!
This year, it's set to explode.
You happen to know where Detective Sipowicz was that night?
The brand new series returns.
I was thinking maybe you did it. I was worried for you.
NYPD Blue, 8:30 Thursday.
Time to talk to Barry Jones, wearing his other hat as President of the Labor Party. Question from Peter Charlton.
Mr Jones, at the recent ALP convention, the party voted for further reform on the waterfront. Lindsay Tanner, the Shadows Minister, said that waterfront reform hasn't gone far enough. Isn't the government entitled to pursue waterfront reform as it sees fit?
Well, I wouldn't say as it sees fit. You've got to ask what is the end that they have in mind. If they have the end in mind the destruction of the trade union movement, a confrontationist mode, the destruction of every kind of intermediate body that provides some kind of different point of view than the government's point of view, then I think that would be very destructive and very divisive. Look, you've got two essential models in which this problem and related problems like WIC can be dealt with. One is the cooperative model, the other is the confrontationist model. And when you look at the history of the involvement of the Dubai mercenaries, the idea of breaking down the trade unions, if necessary, by I suppose an implicit threat of force, and then the NFF's intervention after you've had 4 years of unusual peace and I was going to say serenity on the waterfront. I think this is appalling to take this particular line and to refuse to be involved in in meaningful discussions at the highest level.
But how does reform go further, given that on your own side of politics you've said that reform hasn't gone far enough? How do you take it those extra next steps?
Well, you have to do it on a basis of cooperation. You've got to call people in together, sit them round the table and say, what are the issues, what are the problems, how can we resolve difficulties?
But with respect,
we're not taking a pig-headed...
With respect,
Yeah, go on.
the Labor Party had 13 years in government of cooperation and talks, and nothing happened on the waterfront, did it? We've still got a problem. So that just didn't work.
Well, I'm not sure that that's true. I mean, in fact, if you look at the number of people employed in the waterfront, there was quite a significant reduction over a 13-year period. And I know that the NFF and a number of other interest groups take the view that reform ought to go further. We seem to take that view down at Hobart. But the point is, you're not going to achieve anything by dividing the country and by having that implicit threat of force.
Do you think the Maritime Union, which admits it's a very militant union, should be being more cooperative? Do you think they have a responsibility to do that?
Both sides have got to be cooperative. But as it is, the provocative way in which the whole Dubai exercise and then immediately after this the Web Doc exercise indicates it reeks of bad faith. And I can see one of the elements in it, to my profound disappointment. Peter Reith, who I actually have quite a high personal regard for, one of the able of the ministers, is trying to establish his tough guy credentials because he sees himself as positioning for the leadership. And the supporters of Costello would say that that Reith, in a sense, wasn't tough enough. And obviously, you've got a counter-reaction from Peter Reith who says, I'll show them I'm tough. And you've got exactly the same kind of thing over WIC, where the possibility of having a cooperative outcome on a very sensitive issue is being thrown away because people say, no, we've got to have confrontation, there's got to be a showdown, and the government must win at all costs.
Well,
That's appalling.
Let's go to WIC for a moment. It was really the only moment of passion of 4 days of the convention, apart from your own vote for presidency. Yet consistently, public opinion polls put WIC a long way down in terms of voter importance. They see the most important thing as being jobs and the economy. Isn't the Labor Party out of step with the people again on this issue?
No, I think you're confusing two different factors. First of all, if you're talking about an individual family in Melbourne and Sydney, WIC doesn't affect them directly. It doesn't affect the outcome of their own lives, unless, of course, you accept the line being peddled by some people in the Howard government that even suburban backyards are under threat. But on the whole, it's not an issue that you face on a day-to-day basis, but it is a moral issue. It's not a hip pocket issue for people living in the great urban areas, but it is a profound moral issue. And if it comes to the crunch, if we have a double dissolution on the issue, it is morality that we'll be running the campaign on.
Is it worthwhile?
It's a very important moral issue.
Mr. Jones, it's time for another break. We'll be back with you for our final segment shortly.
I got off the elevator and said, what is this, the 7th inning stretch? American Express.
Lovely.
Let's do the whole country. I'm a little light on the lingo.
Getting a full gander down the front with me.
All right.
We've got Cornish pasties, bangers and mash, pub and sweet, and a lovely Tony out.
That was a wicked googly. So I took a butcher's up the apples and pears and said, what is this, the tea interval? All over the world, you can do more with the American Express card.
The Plant Barn is having the Great Australia Day plant sale, and Farmer Ted is slashing all prices from now till 8 p.m. Monday. Standard roses an incredible $14.99. Hanging baskets only $5.99. Flowering bougainvillea down to $3.99. Flowering fuchsia a crazy $3.99. And James Sterling Pittosporum an amazing $5 for $10. There's thousands of plants all to clear at ridiculous prices from now until 8 p.m. Monday at the Plant Barn, Old Geelong Road, Hoppers Crossing, and Plenty Road, Munda. So come on down to the Plant Barn.
If you're thinking sports car, you're thinking Honda Prelude. Honda Prelude. Thoughts made real.
We're speaking to Barry Jones. Mr Jones, just finishing up on our discussion we were having in the last segment, you say that WIC is a moral issue. Is it the sort of issue that it's worth losing, say, the Queensland state election or a federal election over?
I don't think we'll lose either. I think Peter Beattie has excellent prospects in the Queensland state election, and he did also an excellent speech in which he expressed his point of view, that the important thing was that you had to sell our position on WIC in a different way in Queensland than you did in Melbourne or Sydney, because you really had to say to people who are farmers, to people who are leaseholders, to say your own interests will be best served and the nation's interests will be served if you've got transparency, if you know exactly where you are, and if you work on a basis of cooperation rather than a basis of confrontation and fear.
Mr Jones, the conference was remarkable for the stage management of Cheryl Curnow, and the errant trucker side, it really was a showcase for her. Yet she's going to shadow cabinet meetings and she's not yet a member of parliament. She's decided not to live in the electorate unless she gets a seat, wins the seat. Isn't there the very real possibility of resentment among the rank and file of the Labor Party building up at someone who's had such a dream run?
Well, first of all, I'd have to say at the conference itself, there was very little reference made to Cheryl Curnow, except when, at the end, Kim Beazley spoke about the concept of the third aged or the third sector.
Oh, come on. You made her a guest speaker at the dinner. I mean, and she wasn't even...
Yes, it wasn't. But yes, but the speaker, when we went out to the winery after the very long trip out on the ferry, I mean, you kept saying, the papers kept saying that this was the centrepiece of the whole conference. I didn't think it was the centrepiece of the whole conference. She made a brief, light-hearted speech, and in the circumstances,
sanitised.
She showed what a real trooper she is.
But how...
Well, no, I mean, given the difficult week that she'd been through, I thought she performed very well. But when we went out to the winery for eating and drinking, and even, it has to be said, God help us, dancing, I wouldn't call that the centrepiece. It was the social highlight of the whole conference, but I wouldn't say it was the centrepiece. The centrepiece was, of course, getting 16 chapters of policy through.
But let's look at the reality. I mean, she's really been in the party 5 minutes, hasn't she? There is likely to be a great deal of resentment among grassroots people, and some of that is coming through, that someone who's brand new, who's come from another political party, is having so much influence in the Labor Party.
Well, I doubt that. I mean, first of all, I was very sensitive as I was moving around listening to people talking at the conference, and as you can understand, there were a lot of issues that people wanted to talk to me about. But resentment about Cheryl Curnow wasn't one of the things that I picked up. If it had been, well, I might have been more discreet in what I said, but in fact, I thought the reaction was really very good. There's a sense that she has a very strong appeal in the electorate. She's regarded as credible, she's regarded as trustworthy, and I think she's a tremendous asset for Labor.
Mr Jones, there was some talk at the conference that perhaps you mightn't see out your full term as president. What is your intention?
My intention is to stay to the end. I'm not saying I'll necessarily run for another term in the year 2001, but I'm certainly determined to stay for the full distance. The most important thing is to make sure that I see the Labor Party through a whole raft of elections over the next few years, but also to make sure that we have an ongoing process of developing and refining the policy that we put so much time into getting right.
Should you be succeeded by your challenger, Greg Sword, the unionist, or should you be succeeded by a woman?
Well, I did take the view, not everyone agreed, that it would be a good idea if I were succeeded by another consensus president, and I think we're long overdue for a woman. It's extraordinary to think we've never had a woman as national president of the Labor Party, and there are a number of people who might well consider themselves well placed when the job comes up in the year 2001. That's assuming that the next conference is in 2001. Okay. Could conceivably be earlier, but probably not.
Mr Jones, we're running right out of time, but just very briefly, what chances do you give Labor of winning the next election?
12 months ago, it would have been regarded as quite inconceivable. But if the Howard government goes on as it's going now, I think we have a very real chance, and Beazley's leadership position has been strengthened immensely.
Okay, thank you very much, Barry Jones, for joining us today, and thank you to our panel. Until next week, it's goodbye from 10's hour of news review and analysis in Newsweek and Meet the Press.
Tonight, following The Nanny on 10, at 7, Roseanne, followed by an hour of The Simpsons. Then at 8:30, Pierce Brosnan stars in Alistair MacLean's Death Train. This program brought to you by Lucasade. Positive energy any way you look at it. Video hits.